Hey sports fans, Coach Nick here and welcome to B-Ball Breakdown. I am pleased to have Yago Colas with us, who teaches sports studies at the University of Michigan, and he wrote a really incredible article about the history of coaching and what it means in the context of LeBron James. So Yago, thanks for coming on and joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I thought we could start out by kind of giving a brief overview of what you said. I mean, there's a lot of things that were going on in the article, both historical and present. You know what? I think if we could talk about the present to begin with.
Sure.
You had some interesting takes on, what the role of a coach is now and how that would fit in with LeBron James. And so why don't you illustrate a little bit of what that was like in your article?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I should be honest and say that really the article was written immediately out of a sense of kind of being infuriated or feeling really incensed by Mark Stein's kind of column. His editorial really is what it was. As your viewers probably know, he was reporting that during the final series, LeBron was occasionally calling his own plays or waving off plays that Coach Blatt was calling, or making different kinds of substitutions. It was not exactly clear what he was doing. When I read Stein's piece carefully, he said, well, LeBron was essentially doing X, Y, and Z, or barking at Blatt. And so there was a sense that Stein, at least, was offended, and he called LeBron's behavior unbecoming and unpalatable. I read into that the idea that perhaps Stein felt that LeBron was kind of insubordinate in relation to his coach. I should be fair and say that I think Stein recognized that LeBron is a superb player with a very high basketball IQ and might have every reason to want to have input into what's going on with his team. But finally, he came down pretty hard on LeBron, I felt. And I felt frustrated by that. And this is not necessarily because I have reservations about Blatt's qualifications or ability to coach the team. I don't have any kind of significant objections to the way he has coached the team. And I'm not a coach myself, so I'm not in a position to offer kind of expert opinion on that. But as you said, I teach sports studies, and I think a lot about the ways in which we talk about different elements of sport, especially in the media. And it's there that I really found some problems with with assumptions, let's say, that Stein seemed to me to be making. And the main one I saw, without yet getting into the history, was simply the assumption that a player should be subordinate to a coach. That seems like a natural thing for most sports fans and athletes to assume is the case. And yet I think it's worth thinking it over a little bit more carefully, whether that's really the case in all situations. I think it's unquestionable that there are many situations in which that is the best arrangement, but not always. And perhaps my reaction came from the fact that Stein might have picked the one situation in which it really seems most questionable to me, when you have probably the best basketball player on the planet, playing one of the best series that has ever been played, and as a number of observers noted, doing so partly by very intelligently analyzing and understanding what needed to be done, and then executing it with a great deal of self-discipline and patience, and honestly against the grain of his own inclinations. I'm talking about his ISO kind of ball throughout the series, when we know that LeBron likes to score efficiently, likes to get his teammates involved, but as everybody knows, he was basically playing with a lot of reserves, and so it just wasn't going to work the way he was used to having it work. So to sum up, the basic the initial reaction has to do with that assumption about the coach necessarily and always being the individual who should hold authority over players.
Yeah, I know, it's funny. There's a lot of things I agree with, and I wonder if the word, especially at the NBA level, subordinate might end up being, the wrong word here, because, when you talk about Phil Jackson, Michael Jordan, and Kobe, and Phil Jackson, again, Popovich and Tim Duncan, it definitely feels like a partnership, right? And there's a mutual respect and an even level. And I would think that the best coaches always would recognize that. And that's fair. That said, I feel like, we had done a breakdown of all the out of timeout plays, which is usually the opportunity for a coach to shine with a play on it that he drew up and everyone's focused and they know what they want to do. And that's where they fell very short as well. And so the question becomes twofold: whether or not Coach Blatt is actually trying to do a play that would yield more of a teamwork and maybe a better shot, and LeBron is ignoring it, or has Coach Blatt sort of thrown up his hands and decided, you know what, it's not worth it because this is not how the dynamic is working on this team. That said, I have a really good friend who's a really good coach who used to have season tickets behind the Cavaliers bench for several years when he was in Cleveland the first time with Mike Brown.
Yeah.
And he has a good eye for that. And he would watch LeBron call timeouts, substitute players, run the huddles in a way that it's concerning to me in the sense that the perspective that you have on the floor is not always optimal to be able to understand what is going on, in the general context of the whole game, requiring a separate set of eyes to sort of help or shape or guide. Yeah. So how does that fit in with your supposition or your article?
Sure. I think that's an excellent point, and I think it would be unreasonable for me to claim that a player on the floor, no matter how great a player, necessarily has the best perspective on what's going on. But my job, in a way, is to provoke people to think things they don't usually think. Now, clearly, you've thought about this really carefully and with a lot of subtlety and nuance, and so you're talking about partnerships and a kind of dynamic that involves a sort of mutual, respectful exchange between coaches and players, and I don't have any problem with that, with seeing a coach as another set of eyes that is in a kind of different position with respect to the action on the floor. Not necessarily a better position, but an essentially different one that is essential and different. I think you probably agree that players do sometimes see things going on the floor that a coach might miss, or might notice kind of really small, detailed issues going on, let's say with defenders, or with how a team is defending them that they can pick up on and exploit, and that might not be visible to a coach. So that obviously necessitates the kind of mutually respectful communication and interchange of ideas that you're talking about. I think the issues get kind of a little bit rougher when it comes time to assigning decision-making authority, right? Because if we're just talking about exchanging information, like you said, I think most good coaches and most good players will respect one another. But at the end of the game, somebody has to be making decisions, right? Either the player with the ball, the player off the ball, the defenders, the coach with respect to timeouts and substitutions, or out of bounds, out of timeout plays. At that point, players deciding whether to execute those plays or not. Decisions are getting made all the time. And my issue has to do with how we think about who should be vested with the authority to make those decisions. And what I'm questioning, or as questioning in the sense of trying to get people to think a little bit more complexly about, is whether it's the best arrangement in all cases to have that authority vested with one individual, and that individual being the coach.
Tell us where we can find you on Twitter so everybody can get more of your insight into the game, into sports.
Sure. So I'm at Yago Colas. That's YAGOCOLAS on Twitter. And it's yagocolas.com is the URL for my blog, Between the Lines. And I also wanted to mention that some of the stuff that I wrote in that LeBron piece related to Magic Johnson, it's out of a book that is going to be coming out called Ball Don't Lie, Myth, Genealogy, and Invention in the Culture of Basketball. And that's going to be coming out in early 2016 from Temple University Press. Oh,
fascinating stuff. And what I forgot to mention about that is that I hope that you talked about the context of Magic Johnson not being happy when Paul Westhead was fired was because he was playing alongside another point guard in Norm Nixon, and that was a part of the root of his issue. Did you bring that up at all in the book?
Actually, the part that what I bring up is what Westhead did at the beginning of that year actually was slow the game down and use Kareem, which makes a lot of sense. So instead of the kind of fast-breaking ball that they were doing in Magic's first couple of years, Westhead thought, let's exploit the enormous offensive tool we have on the block in Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And that is what, at the beginning of that season, Magic spoke directly and explicitly about. being frustrated by. It may also have had something to do with playing alongside Norm Nixon. But I think my sense from the reading I've done and the research I've done into it is that it mostly had to do with tempo and pace, and a kind of basketball that probably made Magic feel like he didn't get to do all the things that he could do very well, and that we saw he wound up doing very well over the course of the '80s, right?
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
I can't wait for that book to come out. I definitely will be reading
Great.
that. And you'll have to come back on. We got lots more to
I'd love
talk
to.
about. So thanks for coming on the show. And don't forget, sports fans, at B-Ball Breakdown, we're not a channel. We're a conversation. You win. Are you in, Yago?
I'm in.